Welcome to the Courage Never Quits Thanksgiving special. It's Black Friday. I'm here with my co-host, Chris Dirty Bump. Uh, and This is an experiment in a new format. We're just riffing. Originally, we were going to have Ted Cummings on the program. And we were going to basically just sit and Chris and I were going to listen to Ted sing for an hour. Now we just got to go from here. Chris, what do you think about Ted singing?
So it's so funny about that because my roommate, plebe year, was apparently also very good. He was in the Glee Club, and he convinced me to try out. And I did, and I was one of those who got through 3 notes and was told they didn't tell me to go away. What he said is, you should go try out for like the chapel choir or something like that, and gain some experience.
He downgraded you.
So when I heard Ted's story, I thought, well, good for you. That's pretty cool.
Right. Then the chapel choir, he downgrades you again. Try the Jewish folks. They might get you. Then they downgrade you again. Then you end up like, you should be on the intramural singing team. What's that?
Yeah. So
the hockey shanty team, right? You just keep going down the. Well, let me tell you, I grew up as a good Catholic kid and went to Catholic schools, and so as a Catholic school kid, you always had to sing in different choirs and mass and different things like that. And so I knew I could not sing well because I used to always fake it in choir, and we had chances to try out. So I had a lot of experience singing as a kid, but I just knew that wasn't my thing. And I know the vocal cords can be trained and all that, but it wasn't interesting to me, so I never really got good at it. So we show up and they do that thing in Beast where they're like, you're going to try out, you might have a hidden skill. And I remember saying to my squad leader, sir, I know I can't sing. That's not right. You might be this, you might be the next great this, that, and the other, right? So they had this room at the end of the hall, and I can remember standing in a line to go in and try out, basically. And they'd have you sing your 3 notes. And you go and you hear someone sing beautifully. Could have been even Ted, maybe Jerry Schwartz. You never know, right? Singing beautifully, and then you go next, and I'm saying, and I start getting very nervous. So I walk in there, and it's just a weird environment to be singing anyway, because it's like you're getting hazed because you're up against this wall, right? They start singing. So I say, I think it was America the Beautiful. I said, I got 2 notes in. The guy just looked at me and said, move out. I didn't even get downgraded. He just told me to move out, which is why. So I was on a call where there is the class of 75, and I'm helping out with Sallyport and some of these things. And there is a gentleman in the class of 1975 who will do nothing but get on video and sing and post it on Sallyport for his classmates.
Wow.
So Ted, if you're listening, we have a job for you.
So there are other classes who are doing something similar to this?
They'll do different things. So there's one class, the 75, the gentleman will write his military history papers, basically. He'll write like an overview of the Battle of Austerlitz and post it on Sallyport. Then another guy from the class will sing. They have, one class took the Assembly magazine, which used to be the old style news where the only way you'd catch up is you get a magazine every once in a while to see where everyone is. And they've actually recreated that electronically.
Huh. Interesting. Huh.
All different ways. Now we're trying to find, with this podcast, I think we're trying to find a little bit of the class of 86's version of that.
Yeah.
Because pretty soon all the robots are going to take over.
Oh, don't scare me like that. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Like I said, I'm just hammering away. We've got a text group for B4. And just,
right.
You guys got to. I think Chuck McLaughlin said he would do it. So you got to push him over the edge.
Chuck's everywhere. I run into his name all the time. He's what is it with that guy? He's like,
man,
he's everywhere. Like Chuck McLaughlin, he's involved in TAPS articles. He's like everybody.
He does, yeah. But he's such an impressive person to meet him. I remember so distinctly too, as cadets, yearling year, or maybe it's cow year, and we're talking. And, he had this mindset, right, that a man can do anything he wants to do. And for whatever reason, that just agitated the hell of him. No, you can't. No, you can't. You can't go play for the NFL if you wanted. But one of the things he said he would do is he's like, I'll prove it to you. And so Chuck was not the most athletic guy. I think he was a star man, but I mean, he's athletic enough to get in.
Sure.
But like I said, earlier, I mean, he did scuba school with Peas. He went special forces. He knows he's very close with, I forget her name. Who's our class president? But our ambassador. He's worked in the White House. We went to one of the things that
Really?
the closest of B4. So Joe Mama, that's the nickname for Joe Martin. that
That's
was
actually, given the fact that he had some modest success in the Army, that's brilliant, actually.
Well, one day I'm just sitting at home and Baco calls me and says, "Hey, Joe Mama's getting promoted." I'm like, "Oh, well, whatever, who cares?" "No, he's getting his first star." I'm like, "Oh, that's kind of cool. Where?" He said, "Down to Fort Hood. You want to go?" I'm like, "Yeah, let's go." So Danny Schaefer and JB and I went down to Fort Hood to celebrate his first star, and he was very excited about his friends coming in to do this, and so we went to his house party afterwards, and there's all these stoic colonels around staring at us, like, what are you yahoos doing here?
Right.
And so that became an immediate tradition, right? And so the next one, he got his second start out of Fort Irwin. So Danny and JB and I went out there for that, and that was kind of fun because
That's great.
General Onierno, I'm probably mispronouncing that, was the one who pinned his second star on.
Yep.
And you see this at the reunions, but the moment we all got together, we were cadets again. We were just doing stupid shit. Like he was supposed to after the presentation and the cake, he was supposed to go get in the helicopter, go to and they're going to go inspect something. So we hit his hat. So he couldn't leave the building.
He's Joe Mama.
It's Joe Mama, man.
Right?
So
I love that. It never really ends, right?
No. So then his third star was at the Pentagon, and we go out for that, and Chuck, who lives, I'm about 95% sure, lives in Northern Virginia. But he had a really interesting life. I mean, his father, I think, was something government service, and it was prestigious enough that he got buried at Arlington.
Okay.
But it wasn't military. I mean, I think he might have been in the military, but it was government service in some way. But anyhow, so we go to D.C. and now we're attracting people, right? This is tradition. So, Gree, Scott Garrett came in and Chuck McLaughlin came in. And that's where I learned that, Chuck had worked in the Trump White House. I think that Dave Urban had been very instrumental in pointing various people out to come join the.
I'll mention Dave Urban just as a second, because he's quite known now, and you watch him on the news and all that kind of stuff. And now that we're our age, we can all have opinions about things. But Dave Urban was one of those guys who said as a cadet, "I'm going to be that guy." Like he literally said, "I'm going to do that. I'm going to go and I'm going to get involved in politics in that way." I mean, he talked about that as a cadet. So when he popped up on the radar, it was like, of course. And I have total respect for anyone who says as a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old, I'm going to do X. And then later on you look and say, "Oh, I'll be darned." Kevin Farrell was my roommate in I3. As a 19-year-old, we were yearlings. First roommate after plebe year, he said, "I'm going to come back and I'm going to teach history at West Point and be the head of history at this academy." And he did it. Yeah. And I went to his when he pinned on his Eagles there at the academy. I showed up there, which was fantastic. Saw Father Matt. I think Father Matt. We've been seeing Father Matt. I could tell Father Matt stories, but Father Matt was there. This was the first time I saw Matt for many years, but he did it, and Kevin went back, and I love that. I think that's fantastic. I never had such clarity as a 19-year-old.
Oh no! Well, I knew I very much wanted to teach. And come back and teach. It never occurred to me to be the head of the department, except that the idea of being able to be there permanently was kind of appealing. Very much like Tater, in listening to his, I loved it there to the point where we graduated and I hadn't moved out. My tactical officer was like, "Bumper, you
You got to go.
You got to leave the barracks. You got to go. Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, it was.
Well, taking a quick. I want to talk about that. The academy, but taking a quick back. You never really leave the academy when you go back there. So, a very good friend, class '84, was my squad leader when I was a plebe. And just a wicked sense of humor. And actually, we used to laugh when he was a squad leader and we were plebes. Roger Carsons and Barry Peterson were in my squad, and we were in C4. And so Dave Alberga by name. So we've gone back to the academy a couple of times. We did the march back once, and he got an extra ticket for the Soups Loge and all that kind of stuff for one of the football games. And neither he and I are super sports fans, but he said, "Hey, I got an extra ticket. My daughter can't come. You want to come?" So we go to the Soups reception at the Soups house, and here we are, like, 58 and 59, 60 years old. And so we walk up, and there's a cadet guarding the door, or just he's like the concierge at the door because he's not guarding it against anybody. And so we walk up, and there's a table there with all these hats, which I guess what you do if you'll bring your hat into the Soup's house or whatever. I don't know, there's probably some regulation somewhere. And I just looked down and I said, "Oh, look, free hats." And he just didn't even miss it. He didn't miss a beat. He says, "Oh, I like the brown one." And the look on the cadet's face, sheet white.
No. Yeah.
Nowhere in his programming was it, what do you do if two old grads come up and want to steal a hat?
Yeah. It's kind of it's nothing to do with a tangential story. Eric Whipple will tell a story about at graduation, his little brother came down, because we threw the hats and then people were coming. His little brother got my hat, and then ended up going to West Point. And every time, I swear to God, every time I see Eric, and I'll see him here in 2 weeks, I'm going to South Carolina to watch Navy game. He always tells, "Hey, Bumper, my brother got your hat." I'm like, "Yeah, I know you told me." Yeah.
There you go. That's well. I was actually completely wired. I haven't done my podcast yet, but in your podcast, you want to be, tell a coherent story. But I was completely wired as a kid to go to West Point. So to me, I didn't even really cognitively get that the Army was attached to West Point. For me, West Point was just a thing that you went to and wore a gray uniform, because I had, from a very young age, read books on the Civil War, and all I knew was that old saw about the number of Civil War generals who were graduates of West Point and all that. So to me, West Point was the end point. And when I showed up, I remember being shocked that they gave us BDUs. I said, "What are these for?" I had no idea. I was from California, so I had no, there's some people who showed up to the academy who had no idea of what the academy was. I knew exactly what the academy was circa 1950. I knew what hazing was. I knew all that. I was prepped for all that mentally. But the Army stuff, I was like, what is all that? What is it? Why am I getting a helmet? This makes no sense.
I'm that creates a whole new vein because, and I honestly, I believe it was something that worked against me, looking back on it. But for me, the destination was West Point.
Yeah,
I look at guys, you mentioned Kevin Farrell as an example, who got there and had a plan. I had no plan when I got there. I'm like, I've gotten here, things will start to fall at my feet because I'm going here, right?
I never had a thing of, will I make it or not? I was like, I have made it. I'm at the academy. This is what the goal was, right? And there was no question I wasn't going to leave because this is what I was going to do, right? It was just, and even though I was getting yelled at and running around and academics were inconvenient, but I was just, I think I was a very unique character in my whole perspective on it because being at West Point was the end point. I peaked. I peaked, and I was not a spectacular cadet.
Yeah.
Because I was just there. I was done. That was being a cadet. And then I remember graduating and going oh, and I remember being kind of shocked, oh, I can't wear dress gray anymore.
Right.
I'm almost embarrassed to say it, but to me, it was that much a part of my mentality.
exactly the same.
Yeah, yeah.
Remember that? I mean, I remember.
Well,
Yeah.
you get kind of locally famous when you're in high school for getting into West Point. There's, oh boy, that's the kid who got into West Point. So you're like, hey, I kind of like this.
Right.
I like this. Adulation's good at age 18. It's like being a high school state champion. You're like walking around like, yeah, I'm going to West Point. Then you go there and you're like, oh well, the adulation is diminished quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what was the most amazing takedown you saw when you were there? Now, so the original idea for this podcast was you did your fantastic. It was a really great, why you went to West Point and your life story. But we also were commiserating afterward that there's stuff that hits the cutting room floor that's not really kind of on theme, but there's just other great stories. And I've got a couple myself. But what was like some great takedowns or some great moments that you didn't have a chance to talk about on the podcast?
Well, yeah. So one was the B4 tradition that grew for celebrating Joe Mama, right? Started out with 3 of us.
That's great. Yeah.
Went to his
Big
first
fan.
2. By the time we went to his 3rd, there were a half dozen of us. And then, obviously when he got his 4th. And the funny one with the 4th, it was so funny. I remember so many people showed up. I mean, people came out of the woodwork. So many classmates, not just B4. And I'm like, you friggin' bandwagoners,
You fair weather Joe Mama fans.
you guys don't like him.
What it was like back in the day, the 1-star days, boy. Joe's just looking like, what the hell?
Right. And, in the first 2, when he's up there giving his talk, he always made a point to mention us, right? And then as he went to the Pentagon, he really, so, that kind
You're in a cordoned off area, it's just like, okay.
Yeah, I know those guys, yeah. So that was the one. Someone told a story in one of the podcasts. I'm like, God, how did I forget that? So, first of the year, April, my tactical officer shows up at my door with Terps, our first sergeant. He said, Bumper, you're not going to be happy with me, but one day you'll thank me. I'm like, what? He's like, I was going through your records, and I discovered that you have 96 hours, and that's not shit. So I'm going to give you an 8 and 8. And you'll be a century man. And you'll thank me for it one day.
And the great response would have been, well, you suck at math because an 8 and 4 would have got me there. That extra 4 hours, just you being mean. That's just mean spirited.
Yeah. So,
I was so. I mentioned I grew up in Catholic school and all that. So as a Catholic school, the gift they give you is the ability to get away with stuff and not get caught. And so but I had a very clear sense of staying within the lines at the academy. Like I never snuck off post. I never did any of that. And so I was a cow and had never served an area tour. So and I got demerits for, rooms and stuff, but never served an area tour. And I was late to a class or something. Not like a horrible offense, first time offense. And I had an excuse because it was a medical thing or something. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, the TAC called me and says, hey, I understand you were late to a class. Tony Fields was his name, a good cavalry officer. And I said, yes, sir. I said, but here's my reasoning. And it was unexpected and all that. He says, I know you got a good excuse. He says, I know you got a good excuse. But you haven't really been a cadet till you've been on the area. So I'm going to give you an 8 and 4 as a gift. He says, go out there and enjoy your hours. I was like, So I got an 8 and 4. So I did those 4 hours, and I thought that was the most painful 4 hours of my life. I thought I hated the area, and that just really further encouraged me to never again do something that would encourage a slug.
I got 2 8 and 4s as the plebe. And then my yearling year, I basically spent I told you the story about how my new tactical officer was the one who caught us with the deuce and a half, and then he got a desk drawer Article 15 for having violated the orders, and he blamed us. One of the funny stories, was that he left at the end of my yearling year, and the outgoing TAC will typically leave some kind of note for the incoming TAC.
Right.
And Kent Selby, who was our company commander, the first semester, first year, or my Cal year, first of my Cal year. He said, "Yeah, I saw the note, and all it said was get rid of bump and hatch." You know,
Really?
yeah.
Really? And by graduation, they couldn't get rid of you. You wouldn't even leave.
Well, I was very, very fortunate that my new tactical officer was an aviation type and was a grad, whereas that officer had not been a grad, and so he saw right away, what was going on, and the kind of cadet I was, and I was, if I had to describe myself as anything, I was trying to turn my West Point experience into something I imagined the college experience would be like.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I was the guy who was always people like, "Hey, Bump or Chris, I got to study. Get out of here."
Yeah.
Bouncing from room to room.
I didn't find out till midway through Cal year that my roommates all were not pleased with being room with me because I was always gregarious and had something to talk about. And studying to me was a second priority. And so Tom Hohenstein was my roommate second semester Cal year. And he was a star man. And his father had gone to the academy, and he was very serious about. He was not unkind or uncool about the military stuff, but he was very serious about his studies. And so he got really furious at me one night and said, "Would you just go to the library?" And I had no idea because I thought what you did after dinner was talked.
Right.
Like I could never understand why people were looking at books. I thought that was the time when you socialized.
Well.
It really shocked me. I was like, "You're mad because because we're catching up." Anyway,
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that I lowered the class rank of a whole swath of folks all the way through.
Like I said, the B4, we were very proud of our athletics and finished 33rd in academics.
Yeah. Well, part of it was I was spoiled because I roomed with Roger Dean Carson's my first semester plebe year. That was our initial plebe room, Barry Peterson. And Roger, I cannot say enough great things about Roger on every dimension, but Roger loves a good joke. And we would basically skit and laugh all night in the room, just coming up with silly stuff. Back when you're a plebe and had no access to any media back then. So we were just kind of a couple of clowns, and we laughed our way through the whole thing. And that just set a tone for me. I said, well, I thought the way you dealt with the academy and all this pressure was you just cut up all the time. No,
Yeah.
Nothing serious, just goofing around and everything. And so that kind of set me on a path.
Roger was the name I couldn't think of that Chuck knows. From his SF days. Yeah.
I cannot even imagine what Roger's phone looks like. I text Roger once a week, just to check in, and all I say is, have a good weekend or whatever. And it's shocking the number of people I say, "Oh, I just texted Roger." I cannot imagine his phone must be constantly blowing up because people, "Oh yeah, I just texted Roger. Oh yeah, I just sent Roger a note." I just said, the poor guy.
Yeah, but I mean, when I think about our class, I mean, and the people who've achieved, incredible heights, like, you think about like Dave Urban and Mark Merritt, who both seem to work on or live on K Street. Yeah. And
Pat Antonetti, he just texted me.
My God, the guy, I mean, it's so involved in so many things. It's crazy what, I was just
The story's amazing. Absolutely. And I hesitate to say any classmate's name because the ones you don't mention, obviously, like if you and I could spend the time, I would mention all 1,000 or 950 living classmates or 1,001 who graduated because everyone deserves a mention, but amazing people. But go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, but Roger's journey, Roger's story is he's a major, but he's done so many things, and he's a major who wasn't forced out, and it's such a heroic, exclamation point to 86, to think about what he's involved with.
Extraordinary guy. Like what was fantastic is we roomed together, and then we were assigned to the same infantry battalion in our first assignment. So we ended up rooming together as lieutenants, which led to all sorts of
Now you could tell stories that no one cared was studying.
Really funny. Yeah. Really funny stories. Again, just in the spirit of hijinks and making it bearable with a little bit of humor. So, but obviously a very talented guy because he's risen up to become the special envoy for hostage affairs for the United States of America and just got a young man out of China, believe it or not. So
I do believe it. And that's
most
just,
adventure. So
yeah, it kind of the top of monuments. Who was it? What was our? She sits atop the largest piece of turned granite in the world.
So here's the this will never make it like a life story podcast, but I can tell it here on our Thanksgiving special. The best takedown I ever was a part of, and I was the one taken down. I was a yearling. And one of the things that hasn't come up in the podcast yet is floating. So we all had our tables for our companies. And then when they would shut down a portion of the mess hall for maintenance or whatever, then you had to go find another table to eat at. And if you're a first year a cow, that was not a problem. You just go find a table and ask permission. You'd eat at that table and up you go. As a plebe, it was miserable because you had to go get hazed in another regiment. Although, sometimes you were okay. But I was a yearling. And sure enough, we go over to our tables, and it's like a Saturday morning, and the tables are closed because they closed a part of the mess hall for the Saturday. So we had to float. Now, with my 60-year-old eyes, I'd look back and say, just leave the mess hall. You don't need to eat, or grab a boiled egg and leave, or a hard-boiled egg and leave, whatever, right? But I floated. So, and I wasn't one of those guys who understood the mess hall and said, oh, there's the core squad tables, and there's this and there's that. So I accidentally floated into 1st Regiment, and I didn't quite understand what I was doing at the time because I was a yearling. So I see an empty table. I look and I mumble that I'm floating, and the firstie looks and says, have a seat, right? So I sit down. So I'm minding my own business, and they are hazing the tar out of these plebes. I mean, they are just going to town, and I'm like uncomfortable because I'm like, okay, I may be a yearling, but this is a toxic environment, as the kids would say these days. Not a safe space. They are ripping these guys up. So I'm like, I have done a poor job floating today. So I'm sitting quietly, and the table's full of stuff and everything going. And I get my dessert, and I put my dessert plate on my large plate because there's no place else to put the plates. Dessert's going. And the firstie looks over at me and says, we don't stack plates in this regiment.
Oops.
Now, for the last 40 years, I've come up with responses to that because it's one of those life moments where you're like, God, I wish I'd had the presence of mind to say X or Y. Or like, I literally have come up with like 40 responses to that. But at the time, as a 19-year-old kid getting yelled at again, who really just had recently been a plebe, I meekly put my plate aside and said, okay, well. But if you think about the genius of that takedown, right? So first of all, it's Saturday. So, dude, chill out. Like, it's Saturday, right? Second of all, you've just been blasting your own plebes for the last 30 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever. Third, I'm a guest, right?
I'm a guest, right?
I'm a guest. Fourth, there is no regulation on stacking or not stacking plates. There isn't. I challenge you to go back and find in the regulations the stacking plates thing. Fifth, he takes me down in front of all his colleagues. Right, that's a takedown. That's fine. Okay, I'm tracking. That's West Point and all that. But finally, he insults the entire regiment. Right, so like it's just like all of 3rd Regiment is rubbish because we stack plates there, and that's the sheer genius of it. Because he didn't just make it, hey, you're deficient. Hey, It's like, okay, this regiment is superior to your entire regiment based on your one action. I was like, you know what? That's kind of an Olympic level takedown there, right? If I'd had a presence of mind, I'd have gone to the 3rd Regimental Commander, and we'd have had a brawl with 1st Regiment out on the plain over that plate. That's what I'd have done first of all.
I always thought that 3rd Reg was the Hayes Reg. I mean, Delta Heat and F3, and I remember very distinctly as a plebe.
F3 was
staying as far away from that kind of corridor between Washington Hall and whatever. Um, and never ever going when I went to get mail, coming out the other side. Um, even just to on the way to the gym, I halfway think I got hazed once, and after that, my path to PE was in front of Washington Hall.
Well, if you
Just
think
to
about how we all mapped out with each other where to go and not go. I mean, that's the whole like a prison population, knowing which guard is mean. We would all map out where not to go, and F3 was the place you avoided.
yeah
That kind of thing. But first reg in general, we avoided, and then somehow I'd managed to work my way into the toothiest edge of first reg, who was going to insult our entire regiment. So anyway, that was one of my memories. But we often talk in or we talk in respectful tones about how wonderful graduates are and how terrific everyone is and how we're all a band of brothers and sisters in arms. But there were a lot of really nasty characters that went there. we tend to sweep it under the rug that there was a lot of people who actually got a little sharp edged about things as 20-year-olds, right?
What was it? It was an experiment conducted by some university about that, maybe Berkeley or something like that, or Harvard, where it was like a 3-month or 1-month experiment where they took a number of students, okay, and you are inmates and you are guards.
Yeah, the Stanford prison experiment. Yeah,
yeah,
right. There's a version of that.
Yeah,
like slating plebes because they couldn't recite Schofield's definition of discipline correctly. So, which says harsher tyrannical treatment is not what you do. So I'm gonna slate you with it, right? Kind of funny. I have a coffee with older grads here in town. So I'm in Myrtle Beach, and so I have 60s and 70s grads, and they are fantastic. The stories that they tell are really, really amazing. But it was no different. I mean, there was always some version of craziness all the way through. And one of the members of the coffee group's daughter is actually a yearling there now. And so she talks about a similar kind of inconvenience being foisted upon her. So, I mean, there's always, the Corps never does, right? It always is something to make your life a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. Well, so now that I understand your definition of a takedown, I don't know that I remember very distinctly being completely aghast, plebe year. I'm sitting at a table, and Howie Curtis was the beverage corporal,
Mm-hmm.
and we had tea, and the table commandant said, "I want iced tea, and I want no shrapnel." So we dutifully filled the cup and made sure they were all cubes and poured the tea in there. Well, as you would expect, the tea started melting the ice right away. So by the time the glass was passed back up, there was
the perception of shrapnel. Yeah.
Right. And it was probably intentional, but he sent the glass back down 2 or 3 times. And I remember so distinctly just being completely like, because the last time Howie literally got up, took the bucket of ice and walked it up to the table commandant's, seat and put it there, and then went back and sat down.
See, that's the thing I love about Howie. He always thinks outside the box.
I guess, yeah.
Even if that box is something like regulations.
Yeah. Howie was definitely, he was my running partner plebe year. He
Howard Zoll Curtis, what a treasure. Of course, he's done the podcast, and we literally didn't have enough. The internet wasn't big enough to hold all of his slugs. We had to go through. There wasn't enough tape on the internet to hold all his slugs. Howie.
So, and that I felt kind of comfortable saying that because I've watched, like I said, I've watched each of the podcasts, and it's been fascinating, and it's so enjoyable. And I think of people like, oh, you got to get. I think Kevin Farrell would be fantastic, but
I'm working on him. We're getting. I think. I think the idea of coming on and talking to each other by recorded message, if you will, asynchronously catching up, is a powerful idea if we can get it rolling. And that's that if we can asynchronously listen to each other talk about different things. You and I are talking about cutting room floor stuff today. We're going to hear Ted Cummings come on and sing at some point. You're going to hear me not sing. That's my gift to the class. I've been validated I've been validated out of singing, if that's the right way to say it, or not recycled. But if we catch up asynchronously, then it becomes more comfortable to go and catch up although there are no more promotions, there are plenty of activities for us to catch up on.
That's probably, I think, probably the very best facet of this is seeing people having heard their stories and thinking to myself, wow, it would be so much more, let's think, so much easier just to talk to people who I might otherwise not have at reunions or whatnot.
Right.
That's the
Right.
connectivity, I think, intentional or not, of this.
Well,
journey.
know that the variety of experience is such that we all have an interesting story to tell.
Right. Yeah.
One of my favorites so far is Stephen Brooks, Brooksy, right? He, if you were to look on paper, you'd say, oh my gosh, his career was very short, served like 4 years, was injured, went in, worked for a guy who just absolutely, they didn't get along. And the guy purposely scuppered his reviews, and he talks about it, so I'm not talking out of school. Then he went on to an amazing career, amazing family, amazing. And so when you hear a story, it's really interesting in what happened because it was part of the whole Army experience. So you got, Joe Mama going in one direction, and Brooksy ends up working for Speedy Gonzalez. Speedy Gonzalez, who used to yell at him for chin straps from an overpass. Like that's a story, right? I love Brooksy's story, right? It's just fantastic. He's like just so memorable. But that's as valid a story as, I was, or a person saying they were this, that, and the other for the UN peacekeeping force or whatever.
Yeah. And, that tactical officer I mentioned, my yearling year.
Yeah.
I got 8 and 4 and demeritated to death that year. And part of his punishment or edge on me was he did not allow me to go to airborne school. I got sent to jungle school.
What's the logic there?
I have no idea, but it was such a treat, right? I mean, it was there. Yeah, I was. That was. There were. So it turns out, I guess Chris Herbauer went with me. I didn't know that, but I guess we were there together,
right?
A lot of memories about that. But when we got there, they did such a job of trying to terrify us. About
jungle school, yeah,
right. All the things that were going to kill us while we were there, right? And the fer-de-lance and the bushmaster snakes that hunted man and the army ants. You could see their pathway in the jungle. Do not set your hooch up across that pathway because they will eat anything in the pathway. And the arrow frogs who all live on the backside of trees, and I think a lot of people don't realize how hilly Panama is. But with the triple canopy jungle, there's no growth, and so when it rains, it's all mud.
Right.
And the only way to work your way up those hills is to grab a tree and pull. And so they want us wearing those black leather army gloves, but in 106 with 90% humidity, that's the last thing you want to have on. So all these things that terrified us, and the thing that terrified us the most shouldn't have. I remember one evening we set up a perimeter, and did as you would, and whatever it was, 2 or 3 meters between each person or between each hole. And they have what they call howling monkeys there.
Yeah.
Which sound like wild dogs. And we started out with a great big perimeter, and I was the platoon sergeant. And I remember in the morning when I woke up, our perimeter was like every cadet shoulder to shoulder, a very tight circle.
The howling monkey defense. Just,
Everyone had just kind of scooched in throughout the
isn't that
night.
funny? Isn't that funny?
Yeah.
This is I've heard of howling monkey. I could totally get it.
Yeah.
You just
Yeah.
that's funny. Yeah. Well, that instinctive behavior. A lot of our military training was an attempt to override what's essentially instinctive behavior. There's reports back from the Napoleonic times where when a unit would come under fire, when it broke, they would all like dive into the equivalent of a rugby scrum because they just lost control of themselves. So they would just kind of dive into a pile for protection, which it makes no sense at all because that's the worst thing to do. But it was just at that point they'd lost all. So the military is just trying to say, don't do that. So don't do that, or we'll give you an 8 and 8.
Yeah.
Don't do that, or we'll give it 8 and 8.
Yeah.
What do you think? So let's talk about the podcast for a second. What do you think? So we do life stories. That's a really important one, and I really cannot emphasize enough. I would love to interview every single classmate on the basis of the life story, and I would like the podcast to be more of a connecting tool. So, what are some other ideas do you think we could do with the podcast?
Well, I love the advice portion of every podcast. That's fantastic. What
I want to do, I want to eventually go cut that all together and call it the wisdom of the class. Right? You cut all those advice things together, and you get and then send it to the class of 2006, and then say there's your 20-year advice.
Or some new class coming in.
Yeah.
What would rather than going back 20 years, what would be the advice you give yourself as an entering plebe?
Yeah, right. You can go back and it's such advice tends to get trite, like, oh, make good friends and all that. So you say, oh, that's just some old person waxing on about nothing matters in the end. But then when you become that old person, you're like, no, what they were saying was right. Right. The trite stuff is what matters.
Just throw spaghetti at the wall. Maybe there's opportunity something along the lines of a branch or of units, and trying to find common stories or common people who are in the units together. Chuck and
that'd be great. Oh, I get it. Yeah. I know there's a fellowship amongst those of us who were in the 24th ID that we all kind of knew each other there. So that would be really, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, there might be opportunity there.
I like that.
And maybe there's opportunity to recreate what B4 does by doing it by company, or even having 3 or 4 people from a company on at the same time. So there's some sense of. I really think that. I mean, one of the things we laugh about, I'm going off on a tangent here, is thank God there was no social media, in our day, because of the things we did. I mean, the birthday story I told you would have put us in jail. I mean, I think that there's probably a reticence for people to get on and tell these type stories because essentially what they're doing is they're documenting or.
So an iPhone snap of Pat Kilroy out on the outside of the barracks, abseiling down to get in to John Bacot's room would have, on Facebook, might have gotten some people in trouble.
Well, no, but remember the birthday tradition of derobing, essentially. Making someone
that also might have
gotten some ire. Holding them down against their will,
it's frowned upon these days.
Yes,
holding people against their will. I think it was probably frowned upon back then.
While other people do things to you that you don't want them to do, right?
Right? That's generally in basically all of human history. That's been something that's been frowned upon by most folks.
People have told me stories about how when they were professors at the academy and they would tell cadets in their class, stories about what they had done, and the cadets didn't enjoy this or revel in it. They're like, "Sir, we think you have a drinking problem," or "Sir, I think."
Yeah, right. Might be a sign of a problem.
Yeah. So anyhow, where I was going with all that is there might be opportunity to get two or three guys from a company together, and maybe lower the resistance or the reticence,
Yeah, I
because
like that.
it's
I also
safer.
think if we collected, you use the example of Joe Martin's being promoted. If we were able to more effectively collect big events, weddings, other things, and then have a little discussion about it. So, for instance, Tater just got married, and Tater's podcast went up last week, and everybody has really enjoyed hearing Tater speak. And so we'll have Tater back on, because he's just too good to pass up. And the a bunch of folks went down to the wedding, and there was a lot of fun and hijinks. I was able to attend Tater's celebratory dinner in Charleston that Rich Pasco, Will Duke, and a bunch of the folks put together, because not all of us could make the wedding, and so that would be a great event around which we could have a discussion. And then there'd be these long, protracted, as anything that Tater's involved in, there's these long, protracted silences, and we just look wisely at the camera and say, he is a treasure. He's a treasure.
It was so funny that I didn't know Tater at school.
I didn't either. Yeah.
And at One Army Navy in Philadelphia, he comes running up and hugs me. I don't know this guy, but apparently he knows me. And that was my extent with Tater. And then when we went to JB's funeral, there in South Carolina,
Mm-hmm.
and that was, it was very much like the Big Chill, because we all went there for a long weekend.
Right.
And so there was the actual funeral, but other than that, it was all of us staying in either the same hotel or the same B&B, and getting together, and Tater was at that, and that's where I got to know Tater. That's where, and so when we went to I guess prior to that, actually, to Danny Schaefer's wedding, there was a greater comfort in that.
Yeah. Well, that's Tater's genius, is that he'll just turn it on, and your buddies, and I text Tater every week, and we met literally in our 50s, right? So now that's his genius. I really appreciate that, and he's an inspiration in that way, because we all have the opportunity to do that. Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, I think the danger we face, and that we should be mindful of this, is that we could tend to all come together around bad news, right? So classmates passing, or other things that don't happen well. And so, gee, I haven't seen you for 15 years. I just went to Mark Iverson's celebration of life and saw folks from G3 that I hadn't seen for 40 years. And of course, when you see me, you're like, gosh, I wish it wasn't this circumstance. So I reached out to a few of them afterwards to keep in touch. But so I think the danger is that we start going down the track of we only see each other during the negative. And so the opportunity then is, let's fill it with the positive. So let's figure out a way that we can create ways to connect that are more fun, even if it's, and not have it be an Army football game, because I did go to Notre Dame last week, and Notre Dame lucked out on that one. I got to tell you what. Or as my friend Dave Alberga said,
just bad luck.
Yeah, my friend Dave Alberga said, as the score was like 32-7, I think our problem is our punter.
I didn't go, but I remember watching, and I just that one play, and I ended up getting called back. But I watched the handoff, and you could see the whole thing developing in slow motion.
Yeah,
and the running back just went right through us, and our guys were like walking. I'm like, wow, I guess that guy is really fast.
I guess that guy's really fast. Actually, I was with Jay. Jay Millen was very kind to spot me a ticket for that game, and so hang out with Rich Pasco, Jim Tully from Class 85, and another colleague that isn't a grad. But Jay turned to me at one point. He goes, "Our guy," he pointed out the running back, is really fast. and they just ran him down like he was standing still. So it just, but being 80s graduates, it's there's a certain kind of, and I don't want to use the terms that but there's certain kinds of like old sadness that comes up and self-loathing as you as you remember Army, Navy, it's just, and I like to tell friends that my son only thinks Army plays one quarter because I watch Army Navy game for one quarter and I'd angrily shut it off. Then he and I would go over to Blockbuster to watch a movie or to rent a movie because I just couldn't take it anymore. Oh,
13 years in a row or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So that was a kind of a throwback to those days. It's like, hey, you know what? Let's play Northern Tennessee State, Chattanooga from now on, because at least then. And I'm sure that solid members of the A Club are gonna trash me for saying that, but which is why I'm a solid backer of the philosophy department at West Point.
I saw that. Yeah, I saw
Yep.
you do that. Yeah.
My legacy gift to the Academy is the philosophy department, currently 47-0 against Notre Dame, undefeated. The folks at the philosophy department have an amazing program and never once been defeated by anyone, not even the Chinese. So take that. So I picked my shot very carefully.
Well done. Well done. I one story left.
Sure.
When we went to Myrtle Beach, and we absolutely packed Will Duke's house, and Will Duke wasn't there. He just let us use it.
He's a wise man.
The water was not turned on in the house.
Yeah.
And we had no idea how to turn it on, and there were no cell phones then, so we couldn't get a hold of Will Duke or anything like that. And so for a week we had no water. And the things that cadets will do.
Because that was even before bottled water. You couldn't go down to the store and get that wasn't a product back then.
We tried bathing in the ocean, but the Atlantic Ocean in April is chilly. So
it's chilly.
That was once, and that didn't happen again. And the people next door had an outdoor shower. We did not ask permission to use it. We just ran some missions, somebody on guard while someone's in there, trying to shower, and not hot water, but water to try and shower. And ultimately, the day before we had to go back, we just rented a hotel room and then took turns going through there and showering to wash the filth off. But
right,
J.P. Gross had an MG midget down there, and we weren't firsties, right? This was our cow year. I guess he must have lived in the area, and I had not, living in England, had never learned to drive, right?
Really?
The driving age over there was 18. I left home when I was still 17. Or I guess on my 18th birthday, my father put me on a plane, and so on the beaches of Myrtle Beach, because there was nobody on them, Peter Feeney taught me to drive a stick, and poor PJ Gross, I have no idea how much damage I did to his transmission.
He's still angry. I'm going out of PJ's house for Army Navy. I just sent him a note this morning. So he's settled down here. I'm in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina right now myself, which is how this topic came up. Will's just down the road here at Dibadoo, and then PJ is Pawleys Island, and PJ and Will own a boat together. And I've been on the boat a couple of times.
Wow!
And so they cruise up and down the intercoastals, and Tony Guzzi's got a place down here. Jay Millen is down in Charleston. Eric Newman is in Charleston. So and then if you go up into Georgia, you've got Kevin Farrell. You've got
Andy Napley's in Charleston too,
Andy
right?
Napoli is actually down in Savannah, as is Mark Merritt. Yeah. So there's a whole group of us down here. So we would encourage everyone who can move down here to the Southeast, because the parties just get bigger and bigger. Rich Pasco sadly just moved up to North Carolina, which for us now is too far north. But I saw him at the at the Army
Phil
game.
Biggs. I don't know if you know Phil. Biggs, he lives in the Spartanburg area.
Yeah, so PJ, Joe Whitlock, and Rich Pasco all grew up in Spartanburg. And so Joe Whitlock went to one school, PJ and Rich Pascal went to the other high school in town. And so I have actually, Joe just sent me, I'll see if I can flash it up on the screen here. Joe sent me a newspaper clipping of the three of them giving a speech somewhere in Spartanburg. It looks like probably as plebes. They were in their dress gray, all looking very earnest, young cadets talking about the benefits of the academy.
Very svelte, yeah. But so that's an annual tradition as well, is that at Bigsy's pub, people gather for Army Navy.
Well, now we've been covered for PJ the reason why his transmission was blown in his, in his stick. So he's got, so you got to watch out for that. Because we're here to explore mysteries, and
right.
We've explored the mystery of our singing abilities all the way through to PJ's transmission and the Will Duke water situation. Which I'll bring up to him sometime. Will's got a very nice program down there. He has a beautiful home. He and Val are down there in Dibidoo, and he has this magnificent bug mitigation system where all along the outlying areas of his property, there's a little sprayers, and it might be the coolest thing I've ever seen. But of course, that's with 60-year-old eyes. If I was 30 years old, there's other cool things, but the bug mitigation system makes Will top notch in my book. So.
Very nice.
Chris, thanks so much for the time today. We've taken an hour just kind of BSing here. We want to take this podcast in new directions. We want to take it into a little bit more of an informal way. And you're a key guy in doing that. I really appreciate you coming on.
I loved it. This is a great thing you're doing here, Paul.
Well, we'll keep after it. We'll see if we can get Tater on here and then just sit back and watch the fireworks.
That'd be fun, man.
All right, we'll see you later.
Yeah, bye-bye.